telling you. Have we trials and temptations? Yep. Okay. So, we're talking about unfairness. When I think of the whole concept of unfairness, Claire, I think of Scar in The Lion King. Remember that famous line? He's got the little mouse by the tail, and he says, "Life's not fair. You see, I will never be king, and you shall never see the light of day." And he's going to eat him, right? That's the first thing that came to my mind. It has nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about. I just wanted to share that with you, Claire. Thought maybe you'd get something out of it, you know? Okay, all right. No, he got interrupted by the bird. Yeah. But anyway, fairness. We like stories, we like fairy tales where everything ends up happily ever after, don't we? We like fairy tales where the good guy wins, where the bad guy loses, where justice is served. Those are the things that, reaffirm our sense of right and wrong. But the truth of the matter is, fairy tales are just that. They're fairy tales. They are very seldom realistic. And much of what we deal with in life is not fair. I've often wondered if there would be any benefit. Jerry, maybe you can answer this for us as you come in here and join us with your great knowledge. Here he is. We're talking about fairy tales, Jerry. And would it be beneficial for us to do away with fairy tales and to make children's stories realistic? And unfortunately, at the end of such and such, he died. The end. I mean, nobody lived happily ever after. As a result of that injustice, he died. I mean, what does that do to a little kid? Susan, what do you think from an educational standpoint? It would definitely be sad. I mean, we'd have a whole lot more emotional display that we'd have to deal with. Exactly. The real story of Little Red Riding Hood. I mean, I should start a series, go back through and rewrite all of the fairy tales and how that they didn't end. How that Hansel and Gretel ended up in the oven, right? And all that. Grimm's fairy tales. They would truly be grim. Yeah, the Brothers Grimm. Oh, my goodness. What was your favorite fairy tale growing up, Jerry? The Three Bears? Oh, yeah? This is too hot, this is too cold, this is just right. Yep, the Three Bears. Yep. Max, you look like a Jack and the Beanstalk type guy. I don't know. Yeah? Is that one? That was a good one? All right. Okay. Yeah. Eric, did you have one?
No, I thought Jerry's would have been the story his mom always told him about Little Prince Jerry.
Little Prince Jerry?
Still living that life.
Oh, yes. That's right. Oh, goodness. Well, listen. Fairness is rare. Every epitaph on every tombstone could read, "Life is difficult." because it is. It is. Our lives are haunted by unfairness when we want fairness, and instead of justice, we are surrounded by injustice. Turn on the news. There it is. Injustice, lack of fairness. That's reality. And as much as we would like to see things go back to the way it used to be, what was that, the way it used to be? Because even back then, there were elements of injustice and lack of fairness as we define fair. And then there are some families, God bless them, who are just racked with unfairness. It's almost like they're under a curse. You know, I mean, you want to change your name. My goodness. A mate leaves a faithful partner, or disease steals a loved one prematurely, or unfair situations at school or at work, or on it goes. Tough stuff. Life doesn't turn out fair for most people. For most people. And when we find folks saying, "Why is this happening to me? It's not fair," it's like you're among friends. Because that is how life is. Life is not going to be fair. Now, that doesn't mean, obviously, commonsensical here. That doesn't mean that everything is going to be gloom, despair, and agony. But it certainly goes to show that very few people get through life unscathed by a sense of inequality. Life's difficult. Why is life so difficult? Now, yes, part of that is our own making, our own silly decisions that we make sometimes. But what if it's not? What if we are the quote-unquote innocent victim? Why is life difficult? Oh, there's our quotation from James. Okay. Consider it pure joy when you go through difficult times. The testing of your faith. So when you're having a horrible time, that's when you ought to be singing at the top of your lungs, "I've got the joy, joy, joy." Right? Sure, go ahead and try that. Attitude? Okay. Swindoll said attitude what did he say? Something about perspective. Oh, perspective is 80% attitude and only 20% of what happens to you. Okay? We live in a fallen world. Hello, we should expect some of these things. How do you do that, though, Bob, without going around proverbially looking over your shoulder all the time, fearing for when the other shoe's going to drop? Okay? The truth is this. It's times of adversity, it's times of difficulty, it's times of injustice and lack of fairness and inequality that drive us closer to the Lord. Do you grow? I mean, do you grow as a person? Do you grow in your character when all you do is celebrate happy things? How does that help you grow? As opposed to coming through the trials and the difficulties and the challenges of life that stretch you as a person. It's a big difference. So, very often, life's best lessons are learned in times of difficulty, times of unfairness. We know that ultimately good is going to triumph over evil in the end. We know that. The Bible tells us that. As Christians, we believe that. We teach that. We know that our God is a God who is just, and He is kind, and He is fair. But what can we do with the injustices and the unfairness in the meantime, in the here and now? We know that one day God's going to make it all right. He keeps the books, and the Bible tells us that God is not going to ultimately overlook these things, but that God is the one who looks out and makes things right on behalf of His children. Okay? But the problem with that is that God is not limited, nor is He governed by time. And so the timing of God doing those things could be years down the road. Years down the road. Maybe not even in this lifetime. But yet here we are. So in the meantime, given the fact that God, the Eternal One, not limited by time or space, is indeed just and kind and fair, what do we do with injustice and unfairness? Meanwhile, how do we keep pressing on in spite of mistreatments? Hmm? Okay? Do good to those who hate you, pray for those who persecute you. All right? And of course, that's always easy. Yeah? Eric, can you turn that thing off? I can't hear people. Thank you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 What we go through is often a setup so that we can in turn help someone else. Sure. Mm-hmm. A lot of it has to do with perspective, doesn't it? It really has to do with perspective, the vantage point from which we look at life. We have two perspectives, basically, to choose from. There is the human perspective, and there is the divine perspective. Our human perspective basically says, since life isn't fair, I'm going to go out and I'm going to get mine. No matter what the cost, no matter what it takes, doesn't matter who I hurt in the process, I'm going to look out for me because nobody else is going to. You know, and I'm going to spend my energy getting my own back or setting things straight or making things right, and I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm going to stand up for myself. Okay. Our world is full of literature and full of counselors that will send us on that journey. The problem is, you may get even, but you won't get peace. You may get even, but you won't always get peace. You may feel better in the short term, but what about the long term? Really no lasting satisfaction when it comes to that. We find a way to channel our anger, okay, but if retaliation is our goal, that's certainly not going to bring glory to the Lord at all. And the sad thing is, people who take that perspective typically end up in life as bitter and cynical and hostile, cranky old people. Know anybody? We love you, man. Then there is the divine perspective. And that is the option that Peter spells out for us in verse 12 of chapter 3. The eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous. His ears attend to their prayer, and the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. And the point that Peter gives us is God misses nothing. God misses nothing. God is the one who is looking out for us. He is the one who is listening to our prayers. He is completely aware of the evil that is happening to us. Nothing is taking him by surprise. Nothing escapes his notice. Don't ever think for a minute that God misses the evil. He sees it, he remembers it. And yes, he may be long-suffering, but he does not compromise when it comes to his justice. God will see that justice is taken care of. Because not only is his eye on the righteous, it says his face is against evil and evildoers. Ultimately, good is going to overcome evil. In the end, God wins. So if that's true, we find ourselves wondering then, why didn't he do something about evil? Why is he letting it go on so long? Well, because God's time is infinite. His time is infinite. God doesn't close the books at the end of the month. It may take a lifetime or longer. But be sure of this: justice will be served. It will. God is going to be just. He is going to work everything together for good and for His glory. And that is what gives us hope beyond bitterness. And if we don't believe that, and if we can't focus on that, then we become the loser. Peter gives us 5 ways that we can live in this unfair and inequitable world. But there are some general principles for us that we need to think of first of all, and we find it in verse 13. He asks a question. He says, "Who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good?" Now, if we could paraphrase that, we could say that people who live honest lives usually do not suffer harm. And the key word there is usually. Because there are exceptions to that. There's always exceptions to just about every rule, but as a general rule, if you live a life of purity and if you live a life of integrity, in the long run, you're not going to suffer as much as those who habitually traffic in evil. You pay your debts, you pay your bills, that's good. You're not going to get into financial trouble. You pay your taxes, the IRS leaves you alone. You take care of your body, you're going to have good health when you get older. So to paraphrase what Peter's principle is here, those who do what is right are usually not in harm's way. That's the principle. It's a general principle. And usually that is the rule. However, there are occasional inequalities. We return to reality. Life is difficult, and there are times when life just isn't fair. So there will be times when, despite the general principle, despite righteous living, despite faithfully walking with God, the situation turns on us. There are those things occasionally. It's not the general rule, but occasionally it happens. And it's those exceptions to the rule that Peter is addressing all throughout chapter 3. And this is what he's getting at. Verse 14, "Even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed." Even if you should. And I want to focus on that little if, because it's pregnant with meaning. Even if. In the New Testament, in Rules of Greek Grammar, there are 4 conditions introduced by the word if. There's 4 conditional types of sentences. There's first class, there's second class, there's third class, and there's fourth class conditional sentences. Now, what they all mean is this, all right? A first class conditional sentence would say if and it's true. A second class conditional sentence would mean if and it's not true. A third class conditional sentence would say it may be or it may not be true. A fourth class conditional sentence basically would say it's unlikely, but every once in a while it's possible. And that's the usage of the if clause that is here in this verse. If these things happen, it's not common, but it is possible. That's what he's getting at. If we could paraphrase it, we could say, it's unlikely that you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, but if you should, that's the idea. Now, that gives us a little bit more hope. And he goes on and he gives us 5 ways that we should respond if that happens. Now, remember, this is God's advice. Man's advice would be kick him in the teeth. You know, scratch your eyeballs out. Get even. God is looking at it differently. Point number 1. How do we respond when the exception to the rule occurs? Number 1, consider yourself uniquely blessed by God. And again, this goes back to James. The Phillips transliteration, James 1:2, says this: when all kinds of trials and temptations crowd into your lives, my brothers, don't resent them as intruders, but welcome them as friends. Boy, that's different, isn't it? It sounds nice, but honestly, how can you be happy and consider yourself blessed when you've just been punched in the eye by injustice? We do that by remembering a couple of things. First of all, we are called to patiently endure unfair treatment. We read about this when we were looking back at chapter 2 and verse 21, and even back in verse 9 here of chapter 3. Patiently endure unfair treatment so that when it comes, we can know that we are still experiencing God's plan and we are still fulfilling the calling that He has for our lives. Secondly, knowing that someday we are going to be rewarded for our endurance of those undeserved trials. When people have done something wrong, they can pretty much own up to it and take the punishment that's coming to them. But how do you take it when you're being punished for something that's right? Kind of like the family in Montana right now who are out of state for fear of going back home and being arrested by the sheriff because they will not affirm their 16-year-old daughter's desire to be treated as a trans. And as a result, Child Services has come in, taken the kid out of the home, and there's arrest warrants out for the parents for abuse and neglect. And so the parents have left to take care of some sick family members in a neighboring state. And the minute they cross the border and come back to Montana, they're under arrest. And Scar would say, life's not fair. Sure. That is the problem. Only Christians are equipped to be able to handle things like that. That is part of what makes us stand out as believers. That is part of our uniqueness. And yes, there are occasions in life when we're going to be called on for that very purpose. It's part of the mystery, listen, the mystery of God's sovereign plan is that we're going to be singled out. That's part of the mystery. We don't necessarily understand it. It doesn't necessarily come across as being fair or just. But we can certainly respond to those things with a positive attitude. And when we do, that's when people who are watching, that's when their mouth falls open. And that's when they look and they say, how in the world are you standing up underneath this? How on earth are you handling this? How on earth are you enduring this? And then that frequently gives the opportunity that we have to be able to explain why we're not eaten up by revenge. Although it's tempting, because we are human, but yet, because we are children of God and we have the Holy Spirit, we have the other option of how to respond. So that's point number one, food for thought. And that's where we're going to leave it today. We'll pick it up next time and finish the rest. Evening service, 5 o'clock tonight. A little bit early, because I know everybody wants to go home and watch Brock Purdy win. Right? Stop it. Just stop it. Pray for you sinners in the hour of whatever. Don't shake your head at me. You're going to watch. Jerry's going to watch. I know he is. Yeah. You can leave now, Jerry.